Thank you. Yay. All right. This is the Senate Government Operations Committee on Wednesday, March 15th, the Ides of March, clearly. And we are finally live after some technical difficulties. And we have with us our Legislative Council Attorney, who is going to walk us through the most recent version of S32, a bill about ranked choice voting. So Tim, if you want to just introduce yourself and take it away with a walkthrough, mostly focused on the changes in the bill since the last version. And then we'll hear from witnesses and then we'll mark up and vote, assuming that there are no major problems.
That sounds good.
All right. Thank you. Go for it.
For the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. Before you, you have draft 2.3 of the strike all amendment to S32. The changes since the last iteration that the committee reviewed have been highlighted. So for ease of reference. In some, let's quickly state them and I'll jump to the highlights throughout the pages. There's really three main items. Really, the first one is clarifying the language for municipalities, really towns, cities, and villages opting in to ranked choice voting. Some of the mechanisms around that. Number two, adjusting some of the features of the ranked choice voting study committee. And three, clarifying the effective dates so that the municipal opt-in option will take effect upon passage, then rulemaking in 2025 for the presidential primaries, and then the actual presidential primary ranked choice voting language themselves into 2027. And let me start by skipping down to the first highlight, which appears at the bottom of page 2. This pertains to the ranked choice voting system application in a new section 2691B. That is new, as it's not new to the committee, but it'll be added overall. This is the application, and this language, I'll just walk right through it. It should appear very similar and just clears up some ambiguities that were presented by the Secretary of State's office in discussion with those folks. On line 17, at the bottom of page 2, reads subsection A, application. The provisions of the ranked choice voting system described in this subchapter shall only apply to the election of a candidate running for an office in a town, city, or village if, 1, a town, city, or village has voted to elect officers by the Australian ballot system pursuant to section 2680 of this title, and is using an Australian ballot system in accordance with subsection 2680 of this title. And 2, that town, city, or village has adopted the ranked choice voting system described in this subchapter by either A, a vote of the town, city, or village at its annual meeting or at a special meeting called for that purpose, or B, a vote of the legislative body of that town, city, or village. And I'll pause there to point out that the option of whether to have it be either or just one or the other is a policy choice. And I believe that the committee may wish to discuss that. So I'll just pause there.
Yes, why don't we go through all the changes, Tim? And yes. I have made this as a choice that we need to come back to, but we'll do that more at markup time.
Sure, understood.
Okay.
So moving on then, if there's no questions about the words on the page there. Okay, yeah, so the next section is, you'll see some highlights in the ranked choice, section 2691C at the bottom of page 3, titled Ranked Choice Voting System, ballots. 1 and 2 are highlighted because there had been a redundant definition of what is a assigned ranking, and that has been removed because of the fact that it was generating more confusion than clarity. The next section that has been adjusted since the last time the committee reviewed these words is halfway through page 4, and this is section 2691D, titled Ranked Choice Voting Tabulation. Specifically, subsection A, subdivision 2, elections with multiple winners. And this, again, should seem somewhat familiar, and is the hope was to simplify and clarify some of the language here. And it reads beginning on line 2, elections with multiple winners. Elections with multiple winners. A, if the number of active candidates is equal to the number of seats available plus 1, then tabulation is complete, and the candidates with the most votes are declared the winners of the election. Subdivision B, if the number of active candidates is more than the number of available seats plus 1, then the active candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated. The votes for the eliminated candidate are transferred to each ballot's next ranked active candidate, and a new round begins. And I should just state that the reason why it's number of seats available plus 1 is that similar to a plurality vote, really you don't have to reduce it to one remaining candidate, but really just one plus another one, and you take whoever has the higher of those. So it reduces the need for that additional round of tabulation at the end there. And I will pause there.
Good.
Okay.
All right, carry on.
The next section that has been amended is at the top of page 7. And let me just actually go up a little bit to the end of page 6 first, just to describe. This is in section 2, the first permissible election using ranked choice voting system. This is session law. And there had been an issue raised that this wasn't as clear as it could be. So this is our attempt to provide that clarity here. A town, city, or village may use only the ranked choice voting system described in Title 17 VSA, Chapter 55, Subchapter 4, beginning at the 2024 annual meeting of that town, city, or village, and then thereafter. A town, city, or village may nevertheless adopt, pursuant to Title 17 VSA, Section 2691BA, a ranked choice voting system in advance of the 2024 annual meeting. And the goal here was to just make sure that it was crystal clear that once you adopted it, you could then continue to do it thereafter versus just for that one election. There was some slight ambiguity, so that was cleaned up. And I'll pause there.
Good with that?
Okay.
I thought we were holding a question to leave. No,
Pardon me?
I thought we were holding a question.
Well, this is, if there are clarifying questions about the changes, you can ask clarifying questions about this section. Did you have a question, Senator?
I do.
Okay, go for it.
Jim, is there an opt-out on this if they try it for 1 year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's up in 2691B. Let me go up and find that. That should be on page 3, subsection B, halfway through on line 9. It's duration, and that enables a town, city, or village to abandon the use of ranked choice voting, again, through either a vote by the town, city, or village to discontinue the use of the system, or a vote by the legislative body of that town, city, or village.
Thank you.
Returning to, sorry, I just want to pause and confirm that there's no other questions about the words on the page at the top of line 7 or page 7.
Yeah, we're good. So you can move
Okay.
on to page 8.
Sure. Page 8, this is the part of the bill regarding ranked choice voting study committee, or the ranked choice voting study committee. We have, based on committee discussion last time they reviewed this bill, I have inserted language on line 6 to indicate that the study will be examining the implementation of ranked choice voting in Vermont across all statewide elections, not all elections as it was previously stated. The next change is to membership, specifically on line 14, subsection B, subdivision 4, which increases from, I think it was maybe 1 or 2 to 3 designees appointed by the Vermont Municipal Clerks and Treasurers Association. And also those designees should be from different sized towns, cities, or villages. The next adjustment to that, oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Yes.
It could all be in the same county. It would be great if we could add regions. I mean, the way it's constructed now, they could all be from the same county.
Thank you.
That is correct.
We can, when we do markup, we can talk about adding regions. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
The next adjustment to the committee concerns its powers and duties. And we now break across page 9 into subsection C of the session law, powers and duties. Again, this clarifies that instead of all elections, the committee shall be examining issues concerning the implementation of statewide primary elections. And then also including the following issues. Some appear new here, specifically 5, the methodology of ranked choice voting systems, 6, canvassing of votes and roles of canvassing committees, 8, other items relating to the design and implementation of ranked choice voting systems. That's a catch-all. And that sums up those powers and duties. The next section is adjusted as subsection D, assistance. And where there was a placeholder for brackets before, now the Ranked Choice Voting Study Committee shall have the administrative, technical, and legal assistance of the Vermont Office of Legislative Counsel, myself, and the Vermont Legislative Joint Fiscal Office as well. The next section, and that actually sums up the remaining changes to the committee, the study committee. The next large portion of the bill has not been amended, and that pertains to the eventual 2027 rollout of the ranked choice voting for presidential primaries. The next part that has been modified is actually section 10 on the last page, line 5, this is page 21. And this was amended again to provide clarity. So it now reads, starting at line 6, this act shall take effect on passage, except that section 6, having to do with redesignation, and 7, amending 17 VSA chapter 57 subchapter 1, shall take effect on January 1st, 2027. Just want to pause and note that those are the presidential primary ranked choice voting provisions. And section 8, rulemaking, and 9, tally sheet summaries and return shall take effect on January 1st, 2025, which will enable the Secretary of State's office to have hopefully ample time to address those issues before the rest of the statutes essentially go live. And that concludes all of the changes between the last version and this.
Great, thank you, Tim. Have a question, Senator Vygotsky?
Yeah, so the language in this bill doesn't include any requirement about the 2026 statewide elections, correct? Just the ask from the task force that they'll give us some information.
Yes, there's not, they would be providing recommendations and hopefully a report describing those items. Let me scroll back up to it, sorry. That are provided under powers and duties at the top of page 9. And that would really be for statewide primary elections, you're right, occurring in 2026. However, that no other provisions are triggered by that year, or statewide primaries are not automatically adopting ranked choice voting in this bill.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any other questions for Tim at this point about the language? Okay, and if you have things that you want to note, mark up, write them down, and we'll come back to them. I have a couple that we just talked about.
Yeah.
And then if Carol Dawes, and Tim, are you able to stay with us, or do you have another place you have to be?
No, I can stay.
Okay, thank you, and I hope you're drinking tea. I think
I am.
you're drinking some tea.
Did you get COVID too?
I hope not. Just feeling a little under the weather.
Yeah. I see Carol Dawes is with us, and Carol, thank you. I hope you're feeling better and that you survived town meeting day. Can you make it so we can see her too? And that have had a chance to take a look at the draft as it is now. And if you can provide us, and this goes for everybody today, what we're really focusing on is the draft itself and not the larger concept. We've been through the concept a ton of times. So, so Carol, if you want to tell us what your thoughts are at this point.
Yeah, for the record, Carol Dawes, I'm the Barre City Clerk and Treasurer. I'm also the chair of the Legislative Committee for the Vermont Municipal Clerk and Treasurers Association. I have had an opportunity to go through it, not with a fine-tooth comb. Somebody say to me once, "What's the comb do?" But but I have managed to go through it and made a few notes for myself. Mostly just summarizing what the sections do for my own benefit. And I think the majority of the draft really captures the conversations that we were having before the town meeting break. And I'm pleased with that. I think that the caution that's being used with regards to making sure that we're putting in place education training is commendable and will serve us well. I agree with the comment that I heard as I was coming on board, excuse me, about making sure that the representation on the study committee includes not only different community sizes, but also geographic areas. The other thing that I would say that isn't listed, but certainly the VMCTA would look to for our appointees to make sure that we have at least one hand count town among the communities that are represented on the study committee, because they, of course, represent a completely different way of tallying elections.
Okay.
So I don't have anything else to add. Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I'm excited about where the bill has ended up and look forward to continuing to move it forward.
Oh, Carol, that is so great to hear. Thank you so much. I do have one question for you. On page 3, I'm not sure if you were with us for the walkthrough at this point yet, but there's a policy decision that the committee needs to make about the authorization of a town to use ranked choice voting. And the way it is right now, it could be either by a vote or by a vote of the voters or by the town legislative body. And I believe you weighed in on this before, possibly, but maybe not. So I'm wondering if you have an opinion on this.
I have a personal opinion, and my personal opinion is that it should be a vote of the body of the town, not of the legislative body. I think that you're going to have better community buy-in if they're the ones who make the decision.
Okay, so vote of the voters, not just a vote of the legislative committee or the select board, basically. Okay. I just wanted to, for the record, make sure I remembered what I think you had weighed in, but maybe not. I could be confusing you with someone. Senator,
I may have talked about it when we met, so.
Okay, great. Senator Clarkson has a question.
So Carol, your sound's a little funky. Just letting you know.
Yeah, it is true, but.
Okay, I believe in letting people know when their computers are not working the way they want to work. I have a question for you on the top of page 9. Under this whole issue around getting things set for 2026.
Yep.
So it strikes me that for clerks, for the state to be ready to do this statewide, that we would need to know when these recommendations need to be made in order to implement it. And there's no timeline here for we basically need to have a recommendation in place by what date in order to make it possible to have a statewide primary election with ranked choice voting.
The report from the committee is due by January 1 of 24. So it's
you're okay. So you're okay. Sorry, I missed that piece. So you're good with that. That's a lot of time. That's plenty.
It's not a lot of time, but I think it's adequate time.
Okay, I had missed that piece of the due date. Thank you very much. All I was looking at was got it. Okay. Great.
Senator Watson.
Thank you. So back on page 3, the bottom line 19. I just want to check in with you. It says the names of all candidates on the ballot should be listed in alphabetical order. My understanding is that different municipalities list candidates in different ways. Do you have an opinion about whether or not it should be alphabetical, or should we leave it up to the towns to decide?
The impression that names on ballots should always be listed in alphabetical order.
Okay, we'll keep it.
So I wasn't sure that was an option to do anything.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just checking.
And I was intrigued by this question too, and I asked my own town clerk, and she said she thought it was required that it was in alphabetical order. So
We used to, in Montpelier, there were times when we drew lots.
That's
for
so
who
cool.
gets those
It,
in what order.
it is interesting, and this is a topic for another
Another
day,
time.
but I will,
Okay.
I will say one thing is that there's a lot of research that shows that ballot order matters.
Yes.
And
Which is
that,
why-
that if you're listed at the top of a ballot because your name begins with A, there is a certain percentage of the vote that you get just because you're listed first. And if we want expert testimony on that, I can bring someone in on that for the next time we talk about voting, because it does matter. And so drawing them by lot or mixing them up actually is fairer to the candidates.
And I would wonder if we just wanted to strike that line, like why be that prescriptive? But anyway, just if it's, I don't wanna hang it up. so.
I mean,
Of our 3 congressional delegations, 2 are at the bottom of the alphabet, so I don't think it's exactly hampered people in Vermont.
well, we'll get some testimony on
Okay,
that.
Clarkson.
We have 2 W's, we have 2 W's sitting here at the table.
I
And
am
a V.
open to striking it, given that it doesn't exist in other election law, so we're recreating something different just for this.
Is that the case?
Well, let's hold on to it. We'll hear from Will Senning and we'll ask him about it, whether it does exist. And I mean, Tim, is it called out in other election law that it has to be alpha?
I know off the top of my head, it exists in current law for presidential primaries. But I have to check for the various other types of elections.
Okay,
Because
we'll
that's
hold on
better.
to it. We'll ask Will as
That's
well
better.
when he comes. I think he's already here listening, so he'll be prepared for that question. So we'll hold off on that, but go ahead, Carol, sorry.
To say, in the election handbook that's put out by the Secretary of State's office, it does reference putting candidate names, JP names in alphabetical order, and it has a couple statutory references. I'm sure that Will can give some additional clarification.
Okay, hey, Will, hold on just one second.
Oh, there he is.
Well, in fact, Carol, unless you have other things you want to add at this point, we will actually move to Will and Lauren. Are you good? Okay, awesome.
I will stay on in case anybody has any questions for me.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Will, and I know we have Lauren in the room. I don't know if you guys both want to talk or if you had some. Did you have a?
I'm Lauren Hibbert, Deputy Secretary of State, for the record. I don't need to sit in the chair. I think most of your questions, because they're so technical, are gonna go to
Will. Okay, great. So, hey, Will, thanks for joining us. If you wanna, just introduce yourself for the record, and then if you had some comments about this draft and then answer the question that we were just chatting about, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for accommodating by Zoom up here under well over 2 feet of snow on the side of Camel's Hump. So
Wow.
appreciate being able to talk from here. Will Senning, Director of Elections, for the record. To quickly answer that question that was right at hand, the election law does require for our statewide elections where we produce the ballots for names to be in alphabetical order. Section 2472, if anybody would like to look at it, Title 17. And then the sort of parallel section in the local election chapter, and which is part of what you're talking about today, says that their ballots shall conform as closely as possible to the requirements in 2472. So I think it's based on that language that we've always suggested in the guidance Carol was pointing to, that candidates be in alphabetical order. If the committee was interested in changing that policy, you just want to look to that sort of parent language in section 2472 to address that across elections in Vermont.
Okay, we don't want to change that today. That
No.
requires a longer conversation for sure.
Yep.
But this language, even if we struck it, they would still have to be in alphabetical order, right? So it doesn't matter if it's in or out, as my reading. Is that correct?
Again, the language in the local election chapter, it's something to the effect of shall conform as closely as possible. So I can't say it's explicitly required, but it has that language referring to that requirement.
Okay.
And as Tim pointed out, it does exist right now in the presidential primary language. So in the section of the bill that's laying out that process, you're in line with current law. It's just a little bit more explicit than it is otherwise in the local election context.
I see, okay. Senator Bihowski is on this point.
It is,
Okay.
from a logistical standpoint, if we were to change this down the road for other elections, would we then have to come back to this and change it here? And does it simply make more sense to line it up with other local elections so that if we make some change down the road, it just changes? And that, use that language of should conform.
We could just, why don't we?
I think your simplest option would be to leave this language as it is and deal with that issue as a whole when and if you would like to.
Okay. I think
I
we're
would-
gonna go with that because it's easiest right now and I'd rather not go down this rabbit hole more than we've already done. Okay, Will, other comments on the draft or anything?
Sure.
Maybe not anything.
Sure, and I don't mean to extend that, just to put the thought in your guys' head when you're thinking about that for down the road. If you're not going to do it in alphabetical order, then it becomes a question of how do you do it?
Right.
And you have to have some kind of system for that randomization, and that can get a little bit onerous. And you can look into the states where they do rotations of names on the ballot, for instance, across various ballots. It's a little more complex once you don't have a simple rule.
Yeah, absolutely.
But back to the bill at hand. I appreciate the edits since last time. Thank you for allowing me to work with Tim on a few of the just cleanup issues that I think are a lot more clear. For example, that language about the application of the law is now I think really clear that you have to adopt and have adopted Australian ballot first. The language about the elections for more than 2 candidates is much better. The adoption language about annual meeting in 2024 is great. I was going to point to one really small issue with the study committee scope. I say small issue, but of course, defining the scope of that committee is really important. We talked about this last time. And Tim, I apologize that I didn't get back to you with this before now. I think how it reads right now, can I get to that? Which page is the study committee on?
Page
9.
Page 8.
Or starts at the bottom of 8.
Section 5.
Yeah, oh yeah, it starts on page 8.
Page 8. Yeah.
Sorry.
Excuse me. So it says on page, starting on line 5, ranked choice voting in Vermont across all statewide elections. Just to be really explicit, I think that should instead read in Vermont across all elections for state office or statewide office. Statewide elections still, in my mind, just refer to the August primary and the November general election. Those are the elections that are held statewide. The term statewide isn't defined in the election law. The term state office is, and that's the 6 offices, governor down to attorney general. And so if that language instead were to read elections for state office, it would be really clear that you were talking about those top 6 elections and not the legislative elections or county elections.
Okay, are you on top of page 9 or where are you?
I am on the top of page 8.
The top
I'm
of,
going to address top of page 9 too, because that's also, it's the same comment there.
yeah, exactly. Okay, it appears twice. Did you catch that, Tim?
I did, yes.
Okay, great. So we will note that that's just a clarity change, not a substance.
Exactly. It's what you were intending there, but I think that terminology will really get at it.
Okay, great.
Then essentially everything else I liked. I also appreciate the taking the input on the effective dates, but I did want to talk about one other issue that I touched on, I believe, last time that would be a substantive change here at this point. Not a major one in my mind, if I can have you guys understand. So you removed the reference to what are known as and referred to in this bill as cast vote records from the municipal election language.
Yep.
Which, if you all remember, was borrowed pretty much directly from the Pres primary language. But then you were willing to omit those there. I note that they still remain this reference to publishing them during the results process in the presidential primary context. And that is why I'll couch this comment. If the committee decides to leave it alone right now, I think it is very much something I would raise with the study committee to look into and potentially omit from here. If we wanted to take care of it now, I am looking at the bottom of page 18. The last line on page 18 is where it, I believe, first refers to those. So it refers to them, if the committee will notice, if you look above line 20 on page, what page was I on? Sorry, 18. It first says that we release the round by round results. That makes perfect sense and is easy to do as the results processing is being carried out. The cast vote records, I'm wondering how familiar the committee is with what that term actually refers to. Those are like a data log in the tabulator. They're not a results report. They're not any kind of standard results that you would imagine seeing. That's the best term I can kind of use to describe it right now. A data log. To retrieve those results requires taking the memory card out of the tabulator, which requires closing the election, and then uploading those results into a piece of software that can pull them off of the memory cards and put them in a presentable format. They're a way to look back at literally kind of every action that the tabulator took over the course of an election, whether it be spitting a ballot out for some reason, whether it got put in the write-in bin versus the regular bin, every action taken when an administrator did a certain code into the system. It's used by these sort of data analysts after the election as what some people sometimes refer to as a forensic audit, to be able to look through the cast vote records, which are really the data log of the machine. And to remove all those cards and produce a cast vote record after every round of results really isn't practical or feasible, having described to you what it entails to do so. And it also would extremely drag out and slow down the results reporting process. I, again, would like to know if wherever this sort of baseline language came for the ranked choice voting bill, whether that's something that's common or not. I would be very surprised if it's common that those results are released during the accounting after each round of votes is calculated, which is what this calls for. I would entirely commit to, and we do it now already, making those cast vote records publicly available after the results have been certified and the election is closed and done and the memory cards have been removed from all of the tabulators and sent back to our office. That's, for instance, what we did for the 2022 general election. We have to collect all the tabulators from around the state. One of my staff uploads all of those cast vote records through a piece of software, and we've now made that available to public records requesters upon request. And that's how I would suggest it be done with a ranked choice voting election also.
Okay, so that would entail, if we were to go with your recommendation, starting at the bottom of page 18, would it be starting at line 17, the paragraph 1, or starting with paragraph 2?
Two, if I'm following you correctly.
With two, is that what you said, Tim, also?
Oh, I was just pointing out wanted to raise that. It looks like there's a reference to cast vote records and unofficial preliminary cast vote records in line 14. So the above.
Oh,
subsection.
yeah. It's up in the intro, in paragraph A as well.
I would take out any references to the cast vote record being released as part of this process.
Okay, so then it would go all the way down to line 18 on page 19.
Yep.
Okay. All right. We will mark that, and we'll probably hear from other witnesses on this, or potentially now that you've raised it. And
sure.
We'll. Are there questions about this for Will?
No.
Okay. Great. Is there anything else, Will?
That is it. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for all the work you did during the really busy town meeting week, and I really appreciate that. It's helped the bill a lot, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, and so Deputy Secretary, you're good?
I think the only thing that I would just like to say for the record is we really appreciate the work of this committee. Very thankful to Legislative Council and very pleased with where this bill has landed. And we look forward to the study committee this summer.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So Paul,
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Paul Burns. I'm the Executive Director of VPIRG, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. I appreciate the opportunity again to appear before you on this bill. And I would just echo comments of the Deputy Secretary of great appreciation for the time and effort and good progress that you all have made on this important issue. Obviously, we are strongly supportive of moving forward. We strongly support the draft that you have before you today. I have a couple of minor questions and a little bit of information just to share from the Burlington use of ranked choice over town meeting and some comments and thoughts of some of the voters in that election. I know that strays a little bit beyond the language here, but there are just 3 or 4 slides if you don't mind.
Sure.
Let me turn first to the language of the bill as it stands right now. Just turning to page 3, this is the question I know that the committee will grapple with, or how it could be adopted, use of ranked choice could be adopted at the municipal level. We could support either method of approval. From our perspective, I just recognize that if it is a vote of the people of that community, that there is an additional degree of public education that takes place through that process, which could ease the ultimate implementation and successful use of ranked choice in the communities. But it's a kind of a policy choice that you can make. We can certainly support either one of those. But appreciate the idea that this is included in the legislation, and I do think that any communities that do adopt it and any conversations that are had at the local level can help to increase the comfort that citizens and voters will have with this ultimately when it is used statewide, be that in 2026 or 2028. Turning to the study committee, there's really just a couple of questions or comments here on page 8 that Will Senning was just talking about in that first subsection on the creation line on lines 4, 5, and 6 there of page 8. Will suggested moving to, I think, state recognizing the application for state office here. I think my only question is whether that should be state or federal office, because at least from our perspective, I don't think we would necessarily see why the study committee would look only at statewide state offices, but could instead also consider federal offices for Congress and US Senate there. And I just didn't want the purview of the committee to be unnecessarily limited if that wasn't your desire.
Okay. May I just tag on to that? Because in 26, we will have a congressional, we will have a federal race, so it's not like we're holding our breath to 28.
No, absolutely, and I'm not sure there's no technical reason, I mean, to have it apply to federal office. Other states, as you know, a couple of states at least are using them in federal elections successfully now, and at least as a topic of consideration for the study committee, it seemed like it might make sense not to unnecessarily limit their focus.
Yeah, Senator.
Yeah, so I think this, if I remember right, this particular wording is actually because of a little bit because of me, and that was because, I felt really strongly that if we're going to push this out an additional 2 years and have a whole summer committee, that the committee should be looking at how we implement this for all statewide elections and not simply a statewide election. So I actually think that that for me, this was very intentional to really say, like, here's all this extra time and as a study committee, we should really be looking at moving beyond one election and looking at all the statewide.
Okay, we should change that. We will come back to this section based on this feedback. Okay.
Makes sense. Then at the top of page 9, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the intent here on line 3 when it talks about the goal having recommendations implemented for the statewide primary elections in 2026. I believe that's a timing issue that received some conversation here already. The idea is you'll have recommendations, and the intention, I believe, is for this committee and your colleagues to take this up in 2024 so that it will be well in place before the 2026 primary elections. The only question I have is just to make sure that the committee knows or I don't think it's your intent to limit the application of ranked choice voting only and exclusively to primary races, but could also include general elections for US Congress or governor or whatever the case may be. And so I think if I'm reading this correctly, this is really just a timing issue to say you want the recommendations to come back, anticipating that it could be used as soon as the primaries in 2026, but not exclusively for the primaries in 2026. I don't really think that necessarily requires a language change, but I'm kind of running my interpretation of this by you just to see, does that seem accurate?
Okay, again, I think this section we'll have to come back to because it's related to the previous section.
Yeah.
And hopefully Will is able to stay with us. Is he? Yeah, okay. Okay.
And that's really it in terms of, which is very small, just really a couple of clarifying pieces there, but the rest of this excellent work. And so I don't have certainly no objections to the language that is in here. Sure, we'd like to see it in place in 2024. We heard the testimony. We understand where we are at. I'm also not naive enough to think that if Vermont had moved forward for 2024, that potential contender Larry Hogan would have stayed in the Republican or would have decided to run in the Republican primary. But I will just know, he said he's not running explicitly because he fears a primary process whereby, votes for him could have ended up electing a person that he thought was not fit for office. And part of the idea here is, of course, that you would avoid a situation like that from ever occurring again. So again, I'm really very, very appreciative of the work that you have done. And then I do just have, I think, 3 slides from Burlington. If we could just move to those quickly, Sam. Even before we get to this, of course, the number one issue decided on town meeting day by ranked choice voting was the Peachum decision on their town plow.
I know, Robert Frost.
Robert Frost carried the day over Unicorn Egg and Snowstorm and others, but they did use ranked choice voting at the end of their town meeting. So we were excited.
Very good result.
We were very excited to see that. But turning to Burlington, as you know, the voters of Burlington were given the opportunity to vote to change their charter again to expand the use of ranked choice voting there beyond city council races to mayoral races, school elections, etc. Nearly 64.4% of voters there voted in favor of expanding the use of ranked choice in the Burlington city. We then asked a number of, this was not a scientific, I don't want to put it out there as a scientific survey or post-election results, but I know there have been some conversation here earlier about where does the public stand on this issue. So we did ask, I think it's around 50 voters, I think as they came out, just a straight set of questions here. This was, having voted, how did you feel about it? As you see, what you can't see here is what those numbers mean. So 71.4% are very positive. The 16.3 is somewhat positive. 6.1 is neutral. 4.1 was somewhat negative. And just 2% were very negative. So 6%, just even on the negative side of the ledger, the vast majority felt very positively about it. Let's move to the next. And then that is how easy was it to understand? Again, strongly, well, very easy. The answer was 77.6, somewhat easy, 12.2, neutral, 6.1. 4.1 thought somewhat difficult, and 0, not a single person said it was very difficult to understand.
Did you say how many people?
There's about 50 people who voted. So again, this is not scientific, but we just tried to call anybody over who we could to fill out this survey on a rather chilly day there. Okay, so then this last question: would you like to see it expanded for the presidential primary or federal races? 89.6 simply yes, 10.4 no. So 9 out of 10, they are saying they would like to see an expansion of the use of ranked choice voting. It's very similar to what you're talking about here. We did not ask about local, but of course they showed that in their own vote that they wanted to see it expanded in the races there. So I think, at least as an indication of how how people feel, those who have used it, and not forgetting that everybody in Burlington had the opportunity, all these voters used it in their city council races. Not all of them had three-way races. I don't want to say it was in play in all of them, but they all had a chance to rank the candidates who were running in their different districts there. They found it easy to understand and appreciated it. And so I think it's just one more bit of information for you to consider, that this seems to be well regarded by those who have the opportunity to use it. So again, thanks very much for the opportunity to testify.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Senator Clarkson.
So remind me, Paul, who paid for the education of the, initially for the Burlington voters?
Well, the city of Burlington did a little, not a lot, as you heard from the clerk in Burlington. We did some education. So VPIRG, we paid for education. We sent out mailers. I think we showed you examples of those mailers the last time. There were other partners who may have done some work. The League of Women Voters supported this. There were others as well who may have done some outreach. But I have to say, honestly, Senator, you know, when confronted with a ballot in front of them that says ranked candidates, I think even if one had not had an opportunity to be educated beforehand, most people still find that concept easy enough to understand, because we did not get to 100% even of the small sample that we talked to. I'm sure of that. And so I think it helps to have private nonprofits as well as government officials and so forth do education. And we are totally committed, I should say that, you know, to make it work for either 2026, 2024, you know, whenever it is adopted in terms of for local or state use, and certainly in the lead up to the presidential primary. But most of what was done in Burlington, I think I could say was done by us.
Well, I just wanted to sort of add that, that we did very little education for our Senate colleagues, and not a single one of them made a mistake. So I think
true.
So I do, you know, I don't think it's as difficult for people to figure out.
Jerry Garcia won though, so I mean.
I mean, that's my favorite, so I'm.
I think Becca and I are gonna. My question was not. My question was just simply, we have money in this bill for helping helping do this work. I'm just trying to get a sense of what it actually cost one city to you know, and could you give do you think a ballpark figure on the cost that the League of Women Voters and you guys and the mayor and the city council and anybody else who contributed to that?
I don't know what the city spent. Again, I'm led to believe not a great deal perhaps in the thousands of dollars, but it's a guess there. I'm sure we could try to get an answer to that. For us, you know, citywide mailers, we did a couple of those in postcards, and you know, you're talking less than $15,000 to send those out, and then we did some phone banks and things like that. But you know, thousands on top of that, maybe. This is not a hugely expensive endeavor for us. You know, at most $25,000 maybe in that range. That seems to have worked. There were no stories that I saw coming out of Burlington where there was great public concern over a failure to understand the process.
And I think the point I was making is it's not actually that difficult. So I don't know that we need to, that it requires really intensive education.
Yeah, right. It's just New York spent a bomb, I think, on this. And
okay, I have a question for you before you leave. The two things that remain to be sort of policy decisions, I wanted you to weigh in on quickly. One is the legislative body versus the voters voting on doing it. Did you say something? You said
we'd be open to either one of those.
Okay, sorry. The other one is the thing that Will brought up about the cast ballots. And if we were to remove that language, would you be okay with it?
I don't know of any reason that we would not be okay with that. And I think Will has raised a very good point there. So I can say I'm happy to check with others who have experience in other locations. I think that was a question that Will raised, or, you know, is there some reason for that? I'm not aware of the reason for it. I think Will made a very reasonable point.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Excellent. And I think we have one last witness, Gwen Zakoff. Is she there? Yes. Hey, Gwen. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you? Sorry. A little under the weather.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Well, so I hope you've had a chance to look at the newest version of the bill, and just want to hear your thoughts on any specific language at this point. And you've heard our conversation about the various sort of policy decisions that we still have to make, so.
Yes, thank you. Gwen Zacka, Vermont League of Cities and Towns, for the record. The great thing about going last is you get to listen to everybody else. So all of the edits that were made are good, and they definitely reflect the testimony from, I guess it's now 2 weeks ago. The remaining question, and I'm only bringing this up because I don't believe it was brought up by Will just a little bit earlier with the still policy question that's hanging out there, whether or not you want to open up for the local ranked choice voting, whether you wanted to open up for a vote of the voters or a vote of the legislative body. We testified that we would prefer to have it be a vote of the voters, since that's generally how it's done when you are doing other provisions of elections laws under local elections. But if the committee does decide to move forward with both, I think the language as is would create a little, and I believe Will testified to this earlier during the first iteration of testimony, but that if you have these both open and there's no limitation that a rescind of moving to ranked choice voting would be tied directly to those that voted it initially, you could have a back and forth where if the voters approve, then potentially the select board could say no, and then you could have a back and forth where they're both voting against each other's interest. So that if you do keep that, I think that the current language need to be cleaned up a little bit so that situation wouldn't arise.
Right, you mentioned that last time, so thank you for that reminder. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
But other than that, I don't have anything additionally to testify to.
Oh, awesome. That's great. Are there questions for Gwen? Senator Clarkson?
So Carol and I have both raised the addition of geographic distribution on the study committee. I assume you'd support that too.
Yeah, I testified before that initially it was one, and I think I was the one that said we should open it up to more. So I think, and that being the reasoning B, you want it to be geographic, you want it to be different sides, you want it to be different interest communities. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Great. Thank you so much, Gwen. We're gonna have Tim pop back up, and I think we have heard from all of our witnesses, so we're gonna just go through and do some markup on the bill. I think we, well, does the committee feel we need to go through the full bill or just the sections that are sort of needing attention at this
What
point?
you just said is how.
The latter,
The
okay.
latter, yeah.
All right, Tim, so we're gonna go through the bill. If you can just note when we've made a decision or a change, and then we'll talk about a next draft as quick as you're able to do it. Bless you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to do that.
All right,
So
so page 3. This is the question of the legislative body versus the voters of a town. How are people feeling about this? Senator Watts.
Voters of the town.
Voters of the town. Senator.
Voters of them.
Voters of the town.
I don't have a major preference, but I agree with what Gwen said, where we shouldn't have both. So I'm amenable to it.
I actually feel like we should have both, especially given that we've actually passed town meeting day. So what logistically this is going to do for most towns is mean that they can't implement ranked choice voting until 2025. I just don't see towns absorbing the expense of holding an extra meeting just for this. That's why I asked for the legislative body to be an option, but I do agree with what Gwen said, that there needs to be some parameters so it doesn't become that thing on back and forth.
Okay. Senator Clarkson.
You're right. We've sort of missed the opportunity because some towns can pivot and do a special meeting pretty easily to have the voters vote. It could be doesn't need to be Australian ballot, it could be from the floor.
But for every town that's already
Vote.
adopted Australian ballot, it would need to be by Australian ballot.
So it has to be by Australian ballot, the vote to do this, you couldn't do it just from the floor.
Well, I think it depends on the town, like my town does every vote by Australian ballot, they voted to do that years ago.
Well,
So I
that's
don't-
because you live where you live, there are a lot of people. But there are a lot of us that we do the town work from the floor and we do the school work all Australian ballot. So I think given the option, given the time frame where we are, is probably a good idea. I hadn't sort of focused on that piece, but I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so we're kind of split.
Could we say either? Like, I mean,
You
is,
can't do both, but you can do one or the other.
yes, like,
Yes.
could we just do that?
Yes.
What do you mean that you can?
You can either do it by your select board, or you could do it by vote, but you cannot do both.
So you couldn't, so if the select board voted to do it, or the town people voted to do it, the select board then couldn't repeal it just because they don't like it. So, but like, it's kind of putting those parameters on, so it doesn't become this back and forth between the voters and the select board or city council or board of alder people.
Okay. Just
Yes,
for,
Will.
Will, go ahead. If you had a comment on this.
If you don't mind, just to
Yeah,
help
go
for
ahead.
some clarity
Yes,
for
fine.
folks. Gwen was correct. That's an important consideration, the potential for a back and forth. Number one, just to go back to what Senator Clarkson was referring to just now in that discussion, this is what would be considered a public question. There are 3 categories of votes that a town can decide to move to Australian ballot in terms of how they conduct those votes. Officers, a lot of towns do their officers by ballot. Budget is the other category that you can choose to do or not do by Australian ballot. And then public questions. So just when you all are considering what kind of vote it would take for your town to adopt ranked choice voting, if it was a vote of the voters, it's going to depend on how you do your public questions. And that's what you would want to ask your clerk or select board right now. The sort of all other votes other than your officers or budget. And a lot of towns, that's what remains as a floor vote.
Right.
And so this would be voted on from the floor. That's a side issue for clarity. What I wanted to point out, I think the back and forth presents the biggest risk when you allow for a vote of the voters to potentially be rescinded by the board, right? I actually think there's value if you're going to allow a legislative body to make the decision, for it to be either for you then to allow the voters to overrule the legislative body. And you can parse that out by the language I would suggest to Tim would be that you would just simply say that if the decision to move to ranked choice voting in a town was made by the voters, a vote of the town, any move to rescind that choice would also have to be by the voters. And you don't say the same thing for a decision to move to that method of voting made by the legislative body, such that you allow for the voters to then check that legislative body and say, actually, no, we don't want to do that.
I support that.
Okay,
I think that's good.
are we good with that?
Yeah.
Bob, are
You might want to ask Gwen whether she agrees with that approach or not, at least as the middle ground.
When you want to pop up? Yeah, thank you.
I hadn't thought about that, but that actually makes a lot of sense. I think we'd be okay with that.
Okay, great. Woohoo, thank you, Will. Tim, did you get that and understand the way to
Yes.
draft it? Okay.
Mhm.
And if you need to communicate with Will about it, we are going to vote this bill today though, so we need to make sure we get the language. So, okay. So that's the first decision. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Will.
What was the decision?
The decision was that a town could do either a vote of the voters or a vote of the legislative body. But if the town does it by a vote of the voters, of the legislative body can't rescind that vote. But if the town does it by a vote of the legislative body, the voters could rescind the legislative body's vote. Is that accurate, the way I just described it?
Or their own vote.
Or their own vote, they can rescind their own.
But yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So are you comfortable with that, Bob? Okay, awesome. That's what, check off that decision. The second is the alphabetical names. It seems to me that the easiest thing may be to stick with the and have a broader discussion if we want to when we have the other elections bill that is probably now on our wall. So,
Yes,
That's
Okay.
coming our way.
okay, so there's that decision. Then on page 8, we had this conversation about the thing that Will brought up about the statewide elections. Now, Will, can you answer the question about federal elections? Was the language that you suggested, would that enable federal elections to be included?
What I suggested wouldn't have, but that was a very good catch from Paul, because you all, the committee, certainly had discussed applying it to the federal races too. So very simply, I would add to what I said that it would be elections for state or federal office. I just want to exclude below the state offices, the county and legislative races, because it opens a whole other body of study for the committee to do. But yes, we can look up. I mean, we had talked about that congressional race in 2026 as being a potential starting place.
And would the language you suggested allow for more than one race? If the committee wanted to suggest 2, 3, or all of the races, that would work under your language?
I think just from the plural elections. So we'd say elections for state or federal office. And I would certainly read that to be all of them and potentially more than one at once.
It says all
This is
elections.
all statewide elections. I'm confused how that would apply to county or town level.
Well, so this language is not what Will suggested. Will had a change to this language. So wait, can you read off what you're suggesting again, Will?
I wrote it down.
Instead of all statewide elections, we could leave all, but say all elections for state office is what I had suggested. And that state office is a defined term that is the 6 offices from governor down to AG. So all elections for state office would be any or all of those. And that's why I say, based on Paul's reminder and good suggestion, we would say all elections for state or federal office.
Okay.
Tim,
So-
does that make sense to you?
It does.
And that language would then be repeated again in the powers and duties on top of page 9.
Yep.
And that would allow for the committee to consider 1 or all, 1, 2, 3, however many within that category. Is that your impression, Will and Tim?
Yes, although Paul's other comment, which I agree with, because there is a little consistency between those two, that this refers to primaries. I think he was suggesting, and I wouldn't disagree, maybe we remove the word primary in that location so that it's clear it's both primary or general elections. I think everybody's focus has been on the primary elections, and that makes sense to me. Most of the policy reasons are geared toward primary elections, but
Well, our biggest decisions are generally made in the primary.
So do you think it needs to call out primary or general, or is that, if we're silent to it, that's implied?
the more specific, the better, I think. I would put it in there. If you want to reduce number of words, I think elections applies to both, but.
Okay, so we could say all primary or general, or primary and general, is an and or an or?
Primary and general elections for state and federal office.
Okay, all right, you got that, Tim? Are we comfortable with that, Senator Vyhovsky?
Well, so initially you had said state or federal office, and I would argue that it should be state and federal office. But again, I want to make sure that the language is clearly making the direction that we're looking at all of the offices, not just one.
I think we're looking at 1 or 2 or 3 or all of them. And I think saying all is going to make it hard. I think saying that we have to do all of them. If the committee decides all of them is feasible, then this allows them to have that as an option. If the committee decides only one is feasible, it allows them to have that option.
Okay, sorry, but we use all on page 8, and I'm comfortable with keeping all in for all.
Yeah, the word all would stay there, but it wouldn't, and
We had initially used it in 8, so I would assume we were being consistent using all.
And what I'm saying is I think it should read all elections for state and federal office, not for federal office.
That's what Will just said. He said and.
Yeah, but she's right, originally he said or, so on page 8, so I agree with you, it should be and, I agree.
Okay. Do we got this? Okay. All right. Okay, so then on page 8, paragraph 4, 3 designees from different size. So we want to get the concepts of regions and at least one hand count town. Is that, everybody agree with that? So from different size towns, different regions. Tim, do you have an order of how you want to put those things?
You could say geographic distribution.
Sure.
Geographic distribution.
Sure, we could put that. We could put county, different counties if you'd like to, but different regions.
Regions. From different regions, different size towns, cities, and villages, at least one shall be a hand count town or something like that.
If they're left by the time.
There are 100 of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of them, it's like more than half.
Yeah, they're gonna be left.
There's only QR codes now, Senator Hardy. That's really.
Is that how we're voting now, like QR code?
Okay, you got something there, Tim, that captures that?
Sure. So 4 would perhaps read 3 designees appointed by the Vermont Municipal Clerks and Treasurers Association from different size towns, cities, and villages, different regions, and at least one shall be from a town, city, or village that uses a hand count in voting, something like that.
Brilliant. Does that work? Will, are you okay with that?
I think it's really important to have that hand count requirement, but that's great.
Okay, great. All right, then we did the thing on top of page 9. I think those, no, page 18, the cast ballots issue that Will brought up. How are people comfortable with going with Will's recommendation? Senator Bielski.
I just want to make sure I understand that Will's recommendation is to do what we currently do.
Will?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm perfectly comfortable.
Okay. Perfect. So then what would it mean? Or is everyone else okay with that?
I missed the language, like what the language change suggestion was.
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna just ask. If we are to go with your recommendation, Will, and getting rid of the cast ballot or cast vote thing, what do you recommend we get rid of in the language?
Is this on line 14?
Starting on line 13, 14, yeah.
I am getting down to, I think the first reference, right, Tim, is on
line 13.
page 18, line 13.
Yeah.
It should be in subsection A.
Yeah, getting rid of and unofficial preliminary cast vote records.
Yep. So
Yeah.
so the results will still shall be released,
Yeah,
not the and unofficial preliminary cast vote records, right?
yeah.
So sorry, Will and Madam Chair, just a point of clarification. So it would read ideally subsection A, unofficial preliminary round by round results shall be released as soon as feasible after the polls close and at regular intervals thereafter until the counting of the ballots is complete.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So then you would get rid of paragraph 1 and 2, because those are about unofficial.
Nope, just 2. So I think 1 is still referring to sort of the results we all generally think of.
Yep, okay. So 2, the full paragraph, because there's A, B, C on that.
Yep.
And then would we keep paragraph B and then 1, 2, 3 and paragraph C?
Number of ballots, it would just be omitting 3 under B.
E3, yep, thank you, I heard that, Lori. Okay,
And I believe that's it. Yep.
okay. So Tim, it would be getting rid of that language on lines 13 and 14 on page 18. And then paragraph 2, A, B, and C, and paragraph B3. Is that correct? Carol has got her hand up.
There's a reference on page 20 under the rulemaking,
Thank you,
Okay.
Carol.
line 15.
Line 15, okay, round back, and that, so just getting rid of and unofficial preliminary cast vote records. Is that right? Okay. Good catch, Carol.
Got a lot of church.
I thought you said you didn't go over it with a fine tooth comb.
Just for the record, anybody who has had multiple children with lice knows what a fine tooth
I was gonna
is.
say, I know what a fine tooth comb is, I work with children.
Or had it themselves, yeah.
Oh my God, that brings back some.
Yes, exactly. It's miserable. Anyway, okay, I think that's all we had for changes. Unless, do anybody think that we forgot anything? I'm just looking at, Will, did we forget anything that you had brought up? Carol, Gwen, Paul, okay. All the players seem to be okay. So Tim, we would love to vote this bill out. We have, if we could send you off or have you sit there and do a new draft and
Stay where you
send
are.
it to us.
Sure.
And we could take a break. How long do you think?
If I could have perhaps 20 minutes, I think that'd be fine.
20 minutes. That is great. We will take a 20-minute break. And we will, but committee, I need you back here. I mean this because we have another bill at 3:30. So